Good afternoon and welcome to Innovation Alley. I'm Tim O'Rourke, the Chief Technical Officer for Wade Trim, and I am going to be the host today along with my co-host Dave White, our wet weather practice lead. We've got a really exciting topic today. We're going to discuss OneWater, but I want, before we dive into the details of OneWater, I should say that we're excited to have some very important and interesting guests. I was going to tell a little story. I had actually spent 2 years with CH2M Hill. I don't know if Mr. Glen Daigger here, an industry icon, remembers that, but that's also where I met Vin Rubino for the first time as well. And Vin actually found an old CD of a presentation we all made together. I think it was in 2000. And you were obviously one of the host of that show. I said, Vin, we got to find a DVD player so we can actually see what's on that thing. Talk about technological advancement. But so there's some history here, and like I said earlier, when you say industry icon, that word gets thrown around a lot. And Glenn, I'd like to say, and everywhere I go, if I say, have you heard of or know Glen Daigger, I always hear the same thing, of course. And just as important, Vin Rubino, who's our wastewater practice lead, is near and dear to my heart because I moved from Cleveland to New York in 2018 after we brought on Vin to start up that operation. And I have enjoyed the last 6 years working with this man as much as I've enjoyed working with anybody, and I've learned a lot. So with that as a backdrop, Glenn, at this point, why don't you tell our audience a little bit about yourself and how we came to be here talking to you today, and then we'll dive into the topic of OneWater. And Vin, I'd like you, after Glenn does the same thing, I'd like you to say a little bit on your behalf too. So go ahead, Glenn, the floor's yours.
Okay. So these days I'm what's called a professor of engineering practice at University of Michigan. That's really meant to be a person kind of like me that as a professor I have the necessary academic credentials, right. But that's the professor part. The practice part is someone that has done this in the real world.
In the real world, yeah.
And for me, the done it in the real world was, you mentioned CH2M Hill, but 1979, I joined this nice little, well-regarded West Coast engineering firm called CH2M Hill, and I was fortunate over, for me, 35 years to grow up in the profession as the firm grew.
Right.
And of course, CH2M Hill is now part of Jacobs
yeah.
Engineering. So I started, doing as a beginning engineer, doing the things that beginning engineers do. But I grew into and led the wastewater practice for a good length of time, and then was the chief technology officer for the water business for quite a long time. So really been fortunate to be involved with many projects, many clients, technologies, and helped to bring a number of technologies and innovations into our water practice and water business.
We could have had a whole session just CTO to CTO. What are the chances, and learn from what you learned from all those years. But that's how I met you, that you were the CTO CH at the time. So Vin, why don't you tell the folks a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I'm Vin Rubino. I'm the wastewater treatment practice lead for Wade Trim, part of the New York City operation, where I've spent a lot of my career, and much of it with OneWater, but that OneWater is wastewater. Yeah. So I've spent a lot of time on the wastewater side, it's interesting to see how the industry has changed, and I've tried to change along with it. It's not OneWater anymore. It's not OneWater wastewater, it's OneWater all water. And we're going to talk about that today. So I actually met Glenn before I joined CH2M Hill. He was an advisor to the large biological nitrogen removal program in New York City. And Glenn was brought in to not only advise New York City and the consultant, Metcalf Finetti at the time, on how to do the program, but also to referee a bunch of experts. So he can probably tell you stories about that, but you should see how many egos were in the room at that
Egos?
time. Oh my goodness, how many egos in the room. So, Dave, did you want to say a couple words about your water?
Well, I mean, My background as a wet weather practice lead is, I focus on when it rains. Okay, where does that water go? Does it turn to storm water? Does it become combined sewer overflow? And how do you clean that up? How do you deal with it? But, I haven't been on really much on the clean water side. We dabble a little bit on the wastewater side, but now we're really seeing it all, come together.
And the idea of the concept is so intuitive and obvious. Like, what are we talking about it now? Why wasn't this going on 50 years ago? So why don't you tell us a little bit about the evolution of the concept of One Water and where it is today? So the question I'm going to ask you could take 3 hours to answer. So, but then we'll talk about where you see it going in the future. But like you and I were talking a little bit before this, what it is. So there's people actually watching out there that might not even know what it is.
Yeah.
So let's start with that. And Glenn, why don't you kind of enlighten the audience what your vision of that is?
So it's really about breaking down silos. Is a simple way to say it because our profession had very much evolved as a set of silos. So for wastewater, we had the Water Environment Federation, and there was the wastewater community. For drinking water, the American Water Works Association, and another community that functioned quite separately. There were connecting points, but not very many. And then when it came to conveyance and things like that, it was a little bit in no person's land, if you will. So people have recognized forever that this is an integrated system. We just didn't act that way.
Didn't act that way, right?
We pretended like we could deal with them separately. So, and that worked for a while. But what we do know today is when we look at the system, that creates opportunities and significant opportunities to meet the water needs of people and the planet that just don't exist when we looked at them separately. So One Water is really the transformation in terms of people's paradigm. So this is partly about what is in people's minds, and then it's the evolution of processes and procedures and so forth, so that, yes, we, as we do our work, even if you're focusing on wastewater or one segment, we always need to do that with the perspective of the overall system. And for water professionals, all of us have certain expertise and greater capabilities in some area. But the water professional these days always has to understand that broader perspective.
The interconnectivity of it all. Right?
Yeah. That's the difference.
I've told a story of my best friend was a CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company, a brilliant guy. He's still alive. He's still my friend. And he actually called me one day, and he's got a bunch of kids, and he's trying to buy into, okay, they're taking showers. And I'm trying to tell them to have a shorter shower. But where does it go after I leave it? And I'm literally, we went to school together, Fred. What are you asking me? And then I realized, it's not intuitively obvious to every person, regardless of their background, the cycle of the water. Mm-hmm. And he was actually, so what is the loss that happens after it goes into the drain, and then it's going back towards the wastewater plant, and then it gets treated and it goes back? Is that cycle just fully, net loss of zero? So we're having conversations like that. I'm thinking, well, this really is an educational thing, right? From community-based, right? So I guess this is a loaded question. Give us some examples of some of the communities that are tackling this. And you don't have to mention names if it's the system type or whatever, and that's easier. But who's identifying it the right way and tackling it the right way? Or what are the issues you got to be looking at to tackle it the right way? Because you're right, we've got experts in all the little pieces of it. How does that work in a one water cycle, right? The right way. So loaded question, but yeah.
So let me frame the answer in the sense of what we're doing is we're addressing water stress, right? Mm-hmm. So water stress is not what happens on average. Water stress is what happens at the extremes, which is about drought, not enough,
Flood.
and flooding,
like
which is
California,
too much.
like
Yep.
California these
Yep.
days. Yeah.
California's gone through both.
Yeah.
Yep,
That's right.
yep.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
it is also interesting. The planet. The projections are within the next 20 years or so, about half of the planet will experience water stress, meaning not enough water. If we continue to manage water the way we do today, there's no reason for that to happen. But drought and water scarcity affects half the planet. Flooding affects all the planet.
Right.
So, coming back to answer your question, addressing drought is a classic example of One Water. We have plenty of water. It's about putting together the right combination. So it was actually in the mid-90s through to about the mid-2000s in Australia, they had what they called the Millennium Drought.
Right.
And they coined the phrase the portfolio. The portfolio of water supplies is the combination, just like a financial portfolio, that works well over a range of conditions. So it's not about, am I going to do this or this or this? No, it's about putting that combination together that performs well when it's raining like crazy, also performs well when...
And how the push and pulls of the variances of it, right?
Yep. So the components are, certainly conventional water supplies are part of it. Conservation, rainwater capture, which ties in another
Right.
reuse, and then in the extreme, desalination. So many lay people will we'll just desalinate. Of course, that is the most...
A lot of energy.
Yeah, it is from an broader environmental impact perspective is the most destructive. So that's why it's last. So I mentioned California. California now is people with regard to reuse used to say it is the water supply of last resort. We're not going to do it until we have to. The utilities in California said, no, I need to decide how much reuse is in my portfolio. If you see the difference,
Right.
It's not if, it's when and how much.
It's a given. So how do we plan for it, right?
Yeah.
And in fact, it's not only places like California. The Northeast is considered to be a water-rich area. You don't talk about droughts except on rare occasions. But New York City DEP recently went through a drill where they went to see what other water supplies they might tap into because of a reliability issue. They had a major break in their water system. They had to shut it down to repair it. They studied whether to do desal and raised water reuse and these things because they had to be careful about water they used while they did the fix. So it was a reliability issue as much as it wasn't really a drought to drill. It was a reliability issue. And we talked earlier about how we've been siloed. One of the things I did early on was try to spread the word of Glenn throughout the New York area, and because he was such a great resource. So I asked him for things. I dug this out of the records along with the CD. And this one is called Wastewater Management in the 21st Century. Well, we're here, right?
Yeah.
He wrote it in 2006. It's titled Wastewater Management. As you start reading the paper, it goes immediately into One Water.
Right.
And the need for treating it as one resource and like. So Glenn's been at this now for upwards of 15 to 20 years, thinking about water as a single resource and how you go back and forth and use it differently. Right? So we talk about the water cycle and teaching. I used to do the third grade in my local school. We talked about the water cycle and how the water you drink goes into the rivers and you pull it back out, it goes in the clouds. And the kids were, oh yeah.
I could have you talk to my best friend.
I still have
You need to meet my buddy Vin.
I still have that presentation somewhere.
Bring Fred to the podcast.
Yeah, well, he's taught me. You need to talk to Vin. But the One Water concept is so intuitive and obvious, right? What you're saying, but isn't it different in the different areas that you're? I mean, I grew up in this town. We're in Detroit, Michigan, by the way, for people that might not know that today. I grew up here, as did Dave. And obviously, you live here now and have a history in the Midwest as well, where you went to school and all that. We never thought of water as anything other than plentiful, almost abundant, excess, right? And I've got stories of utility and authorities, and you probably know what I'm not going to mention anybody, but now I want a drought in the summer. It's going to raise revenues. Let's use the water to water the lawns, right? And that whole mentality was a regionalized mentality. And I think it's evolving and changing with the newer generations of the stewards of our future environments, right? The younger generations see what may not have been obvious to at least my generation. And
I think that's reflective of one of the changes, though. We actually need to change how we pay for water.
Exactly.
Right, rather than on a commodity basis, and we just want to sell as much as we can. So these are some of the things that we need to continue to work with, and some of the barriers. So paying for water differently. There's no reason why we can't. We pay for a lot of other things differently. But
exactly.
That's
you just got to reinvent the paradigm, like you're saying. It's a paradigm, and it's become more and more of a in your conscience now, this one water concept. What do you think the drivers were you wrote this in 2006. If I count right, that was 17 years ago, right? Mm-hmm. Because it didn't happen in 2006, the use of the one water concept is not new, but relatively recent. What do you think the drivers were to say, hey, we need to wake up and deal with this a different way, or a better way, I guess?
So I was really, you guys know my background. I was really fortunate to be engaged in the water practice pretty broadly.
Yes.
So I saw these things happening. So I still find this interesting. I'll go someplace and there's a discussion about something, and people get interested and they come along and say, but that can't be done. I know that many places where
it has and can and has been done, right? Yeah.
So that's part of that was we can do this, and I saw the problems that we have, the projection, and I said this earlier, the projection that in 20 years, half the planet is in water stress. That's only if we keep doing what we're doing.
If repeating the same. Yeah.
That's right. That's what I saw. So
your opinion, yes, there are drought-stricken areas with overpopulation potentially, if you argue that concept, but you don't think that's an unsolvable problem.
Correct.
And that's inspirational. That will get people listening. Okay.
Yeah. People are going to live where they want to live.
They're going to live where they want to live.
Like Arizona, right?
Hey,
Colorado River. I want to live out there, and
And we're saying, come back to the Great Lakes region because there's all kinds of water here. You don't have to worry about it. But the reality is, people are going to migrate to where they want to live.
Yeah.
And if you can get a successful one water system in place institutionally, then it's not an impossibility, right? Yeah, and that's good.
So I do think that we have the template to solve drought. We don't yet have the template in place to solve flooding. I think now there are ideas. I think there's the right set of ideas in terms of flooding. So, but in terms of enough professionals rallying around it and working on both the mindset and the institutional constraints, I think it's the same idea. It's a portfolio, but a portfolio of different components. Mm-hmm. So, a lot of, we've got the traditional. I hate the phrases green and gray. I hate those because they, the word is
negative connotation when you hear a word. Yeah.
Emotional. It's emotional. Yeah. But I think you got many people that say, okay, green infrastructure is the solution. It is part of the solution. Green infrastructure really is more a water quality than a flood management because
I agree with that.
It's not able to handle we have to decide in these large rainfall events where we're going to flood. Mm-hmm. So we can't convey it, so it's deciding where we flood.
Where can you place it, like park, and absorb it till it can be, yeah.
And the Dutch are some of the furthest along in this, and they have a phrase, they call it room for the river. So they've actually, they have dikes and so forth, but they ask the question, okay, when that is defeated as a defense, what happens, and what do we want to happen next? Mm-hmm. So I think we have conceptually the answer. Now it's working through both the mindset and the again, we regulate these things differently, so we need to figure out how the regulations.
Yeah, the flood management that you're talking is, and that's the one you see that's most obvious. I mean, obviously California just went through an unbelievable. I think it was the first time I heard the word atmospheric river, and their system was set up obviously to get massive storms out to the ocean to relieve flood inundation, right? Mm-hmm. And I think I saw it, and I don't know this for a fact, that they lost a lot of the water that could have otherwise been retained somehow with a different system, right? So I'm sure they're going to tackle that going forward. But over here in Detroit, my first project with Wade Trim was with the Rouge River National Wet Weather Strait. About that time, the Rouge River restoration. And the Rouge River, and you're familiar with because you're here now, with the middle, the upper, and the lower Rouge, is a floodway. So there's a road, and there's obviously a sewer under there, and there's a nice park that people, but when you get blasted with rain, at least it was when I was working on it, no one's going anywhere near that. It's underwater. Yep. And it worked well with the community around it because people weren't in the park while it's flooding, right? Mm-hmm. But that doesn't exist everywhere, right? And so that's part of that, tackling that problem too. But you're right, the flooding issues were kind of a separate, siloed. Yeah, but that's a bigger storm that you're going to be dealing with the combined sewer overflow storm I'm trying to keep from going to that river, right? Mm-hmm. It's a different level of storm. Yep. Yeah, but it's all the same system, and we're trying to tackle two problems in the same area at the same time, right?
And this green infrastructure is another driver for the discussion about One Water. On a smaller level, when you think about the flooding is somewhat mitigated when you're capturing green infrastructure. Mm-hmm. Retention basins, detention basins. It's obviously not going to solve your flooding problems, but it does mitigate them, and it opens the door for the discussions of One Water. Can you use that stormwater some other way, even if you're going to use it just to recharge the aquifer, and maybe you don't need that aquifer, but you're recharging the aquifer.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So you're sort of going back to the way the water cycle was intended. Again, it's in a smaller way because green infrastructure can't do it in a bigger way. It's just not possible. They had a public meeting about Jamaica Bay, and one of the opening slides was
in New York.
In Jamaica Bay, but thank you, in New York City. So the opening slides discuss, well, everybody says we're going to use green infrastructure to solve our problems, and then the picture was Manhattan disappeared and was green. This is what you'd have to do to solve your problems in urban areas. So you can't do that. So you're never going to be able to solve your
So they actually replaced all the buildings with just greenery?
And then you solved your problems.
Yeah, green just solved it.
green solved the problem. But it has a place, and what's more, it's opened more of a dialogue about One Water. Because One Water is all these crossovers. It's water to wastewater to wet weather management. So that's the connection is in a lot of different places.
Vin, I remember the green movement to replace the gray movement was a big, and I'm not going to call out any individuals or instances or even community levels, but one of the examples that was given to the audience that was all pushing that green will, just like you said, green will solve it. We didn't do that. It would have been better. This is what this community would look like if that was the only solution. The person took a potted plant and took a cup of coffee and said, okay, this is the storm that works well with this green situation. They pour it in there. And it worked well. You know what I mean? And no water came out. It looks perfect. Good use. He takes a 5-gallon. This is this flood storm that happened last week. He pours it all over the table. And he says, you just got to understand there's limitations to what it can and can't do, but there's a place for it because, and for me it was water quality, obviously, but it was also, let's face it, community enhancement. People like looking at green infrastructure. It enhances the community. So if it's a stormwater management tactic, you should be using it wherever you can. And that was always, it isn't this or that, it's this and that.
Yes.
And that was always the challenge for me anyway when I was trying to tackle those two siloed ideas, right? Because the idea is, well, there's a big gray tunnel behind this anyway, so it could capture the small storms too, so why even invest in it, right? And it's, well, no, you're missing the point. There's you don't want these little storms to get into that tunnel and pump it out if you don't have to.
And
right?
you mentioned silo, Glenn mentioned silo. We actually used to silo engineers too. You became a water engineer or a wastewater engineer, or sometimes a wet weather engineer, and you didn't often cross over, and that mindset stayed for decades. And people didn't think about it because they were trained in a certain area. They stayed in their lane, in their silo, and getting out of those silos is important for us as engineers and the industry as a whole.
Right. Be more of a generalist on this kind.
Yeah.
You got to learn the whole cycle. Right?
Yep.
Well, one thing I've noticed too, in just going to conferences, you used to go to the WEF conference in June, and you'd go to the AWABA conference in July. Now they're having them at the same location, in the same building. So you've got different kinds of engineers coming together,
Right.
kind of sharing and looking at these ideas is one thing. So I don't know if you see that happening in the industry, having one overall umbrella organization to help with that, but I've seen that at a local level.
Yeah. Of course, the International Water Association that I've been involved with, that's one of the powers of it, is the fact that it is a water cycle-wide organization.
Do you think the European countries got an earlier jump on this than North America, or has it been a united and we're all in the same playing field with this? You mentioned the Dutch. That's been. I started hearing about this from the Dutch movement, right?
Yes.
And I remember I was talking technology with someone else about another type of technology that's being widely used in Europe. And it was the model-based design concept, and it was at the Technical Leadership Conference this year. So 75% of the major projects in this part of Europe are being done with model-based design. 25% in the United States, and they said one of the reasons is that we have 50 jurisdictions on this particular type of project, right?
Yep.
Called 50 states. And so there isn't that united, let's make this a united. Do you sense that at all in the siloed approach, what's going on regionally and or jurisdictionally in America on this concept, or no?
So one of the advantages of Europe is that they are independent countries.
Right.
So I don't know exactly, but if it was the U.S., the Netherlands would be a reasonably sized state. So, but it's an independent country, so you get a different kind of experimentation going on there. In the U.S., we have experimentation going on, but it's a little different again, just because of the setting.
Right.
So that's I think the difference. Innovation. We actually know a lot about innovation. People have been studying innovation, the diffusion of innovation, and so forth. It turns out that if you have any population, that it's about 3 to 5% of that population are the innovators and early adopters. So we know that very well in general. Paul O'Callaghan with Blue Tech Research actually did a Ph.D. looking at this and has really demonstrated that water is no different. So the bigger the scale that you're observing, you'll see more, because it's the 3 to 5 to 6% and so forth that's going on.
Moving the change.
So again, if you want to see what's possible, it's really important to take a broad view. You might be, your efforts, your practice, and so forth might be here, but you always want to keep the broader view, because it tells you what's really possible. So again, that's kind of what led to this. I was seeing that people were actually doing some of these things, and that they were possible, and so forth.
So you could say, yes, it's been done, and here's where it's been done.
Yep.
All right, so this has been a great discussion, Glenn, about the whole concept of breaking down the silos, the one water cycle, and how you got to look at things and the paradigms going forward. And I think what we want to transition for the next session is some of the more broader how-tos, right? The mechanisms for doing that. So with that, please stay tuned for the next podcast, which we're going to actually record while we're still here, but we're going to show it later as we build on that concept. So thanks for joining today, and look forward to hearing you join us for the next podcast on the One Water subject as we bring a close to this version of Innovation Alley. Thank you all. Look forward to seeing you again.